So the government have decided to have a National COVID Day of Reflection on March the 9th, Sunday I believe it is. So what does that mean to them and what does it mean to us? Well, I would suppose that to them it's all about drumming up how lucky we were, how we dodged the ball, flattened the curve, and all the other bullshit that they had going on, and say that they did such a wonderful job of keeping us all safe. To us lot, we'll think about how many people we lost in solitude, how many people took a vaccine that was unproven and turned out to be fucking dangerous, if not lethal in many cases, how the access deaths never went up, how we managed to fuck the economy, fuck small businesses, turn the kids that we had either into terrified kids because they were worried about getting someone who's going to kill them, or because they spent so much time on their own in their room they ended up with fucking social anxiety. I suppose we could reflect on that. We could reflect how millionaires became billionaires. We could reflect on how, during this process, especially in America, but also through Europe, the actual army had taken control of the situation because they treated it not so much like an outbreak of, say, for instance, something and nothing, which is exactly what it was. They treated it like they would do for, say, for instance, after a massive nuclear attack, nuclear fallout, or like a dirty bomb. But anyway, and it seems that it wasn't just America, that the military forces around the globe had a lot to do with it. And some of you may or may not notice that obviously all the social media companies were all piling in on this one. And this was when I became aware of, and I can't remember the exact brigade, but basically as a part of the army that used to be in charge of dealing with external threats to the UK. And it was around this time that they then focused on its own people and shutting them up, telling the truth. But why? Well, COVID was one of the biggest psyops that there ever has been, and the government got away with, or the World Economic Forum, the governments, the World Health Organization, and all the others, all managed to get away with more than they've ever had. They managed to take away more of our freedoms, enact more laws, and make us live in a much more draconian country. And you'd be saying to yourself, I can't believe we fucking lived through that. Well, I'm sorry, there's more to come. Because Bill Gates, just lately, after his 3-hour meeting that he said was productive with Trump, which is a worry in itself, right, has also said that there is another pandemic coming that's going to be far more deadly, and if you don't carry on funding us, millions of people will die. Now, we also know that he and many of his other alleged philanthropists, and I'm taking the piss when I say that clearly, but many of the global elite are all about thinning out the numbers. But they're not talking about thinning out the rich or the elite. They're talking about thinning out the people who are below them. By the way, if you don't know who that is, that's you and me in their eyes. Not in our eyes, but in their eyes. So what have we got coming? And he's talking about, obviously, AIDS and other stuff like that needs to be funded. Well, here's the thing. How did AIDS come about? Did it really come from a monkey, or was it something completely different? In the same way that this COVID-19, where during that pandemic that was so dangerous, we all had to stay in our houses, there was panic buying, there was people lining up in long queues to get an experimental vaccine, there were people that were willing to put other people in prison for not taking this vaccine that's actually given people vaccine damage, etc., etc., during that process. And I've actually just lost the thread of my thoughts. All that stuff I've just mentioned is important here, right? During that period where there was a massive divide, and some of the left and some of the right had more divide over that, and there were people who were pro-free speech and people that come out of the woodwork as being basically wanting more laws to oppress each other. It was a time that actually brought out a word that I'd not heard before in its application, a Karen. Bearing in mind, I was with a woman at the time. No, I wasn't. I'd split with her by then. Sorry, my bad. I dated a woman with Karin. I don't know what the significance is there, but Karen, I think, is Karen. But these Karens, and the male version, allegedly Keith, were the people that would tell you have to wear a mask, you have to have 2 foot distance, you've been out for more than your allotted time, you had a party. These were the grasses. These were the nasty little cunts. These used to be what we call the Sheilas of this world, the ones that were always twitching on the curtain and gossiping. These people, because of the laws that were brought about, were protected and actually felt fucking immortal. And they had a power then that they've never had before. Do you think they wanted to give it up? Well, I can tell you they fucking didn't. And they're still trying to hold on to it now. But imagine this. We're all a bit wiser to this, okay? Or admittedly, we've lost a lot of freedoms. Many people have died a lot earlier than they needed to. And whilst the curve, really, the flattening the curve was all bullshit, and the amount of people that didn't get treated for operations that they had booked because they hadn't had this experimental piece of shit, how also the people that made this experimental piece of shit were immune from prosecution, that's never been known before. But they'll say it's because they rushed it in. But did they rush it in? Or is this experimental piece of shit nothing more than a psyop and also a way to thin out the population? Well, here's the thing. I heard it argued the other day between a couple of people on a guy who presents on GB News, and here's Oliver, and he'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, these two scientists are saying, well, if it was an operation to thin out the population, then it actually didn't do a very good job. Thing is, we don't know the longer term implications. There were a lot of people that had strokes, heart attacks, cancer went through the roof, leukemia, stupid amounts of other things have gone through the roof, all right? But we still don't know the long-term application, because how long ago was that? Not that long. But what I want to know is, if they've come out with something that is actually a fuck sight more deadly, this works two ways. Many of us will say, I'm not falling for that shit, and if there is actually something deadly out there that they've put out there, right, then many of us will get wiped out because we won't take any vaccine that allegedly will fix you, because that was the one where if you're not vaccinated, the vaccination I have doesn't work. It's like saying, put your glasses on, I need to read this book. It's bollocks. And we knew it was bollocks at the time, but it was the biggest division between people who are just purely about following orders and people that actually go, do you know what, fuck off. But if they bring out something totally deadly now, there will be people that will go and literally queue up. They're still about. You know, the Karens and the Keiths haven't gone anywhere, right? And with it being a lot more deadly, allegedly, right? How many of you will go, well, what if I've got it wrong? And then you go out and take something, and that ends up turning out to be a bit dodgy. Or what if they bring out something that is actually deadly and the vaccine actually works? All right, what if they did that? So a load of us, the ones that like to push back and resist what's going on and think for ourselves, will get wiped out because we're not falling for their shit. So is this part of the operation? Was the first thing to see who got on board and who looked through it and went, nah, fuck off? Because let's be honest, the people that just follow the rules aren't a threat to the system. They never were, they never will be, okay? These are the people that, oh, please leave me alone and I'll do whatever you tell me. You know the ones. But my type, you know, people like you, because at the end of the day, you wouldn't be watching this if you weren't very similar. Will we end up being the intended victims of the next thing? We don't take this thing that would actually work, and then as a consequence of us not trusting these people with good reason, we actually end up getting wiped out. It's a possibility. We shouldn't ever rule anything out, right? And I'm not saying to go and take a vaccine. I'm not saying that at all. But when the next thing comes, and it will, as sure as fucking eggs are eggs, all right, we'll have to actually weigh the situation up at the time. And I hate to say this, I'm going to be one of those, I'm going to play the lottery and just go, fuck it, I'm not having it, no matter what. And if I get wiped out, I get wiped out. That's the way I look at it, right? I've had a good life, whatever. And you'll probably save me from shitting myself, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or old age, living alone or some shit, whatever. So, but I'd like to know what you'll do. And if you remember when this Wuhan and the video came out, do you remember all that grainy video footage of people picking up body bags and throwing them in the back of a van? And, you know, we're all looking at it going, why is it whenever you see a video like this, it's always a chick quality? And yet when you see a video of something that we're doing, it's always fucking 4G or 4K or whatever you call it, right? That was a question I had. But can you imagine? We've all been told we got to lock down. Loads of us won't. They'll send the military out, right? If it is generally a bad thing, right? And if you remember, the military were out the last time. Do you remember there's hospitals, where we paid £3,500 a bed that nobody actually slept in, and then we scrapped them for £3 a piece? Well, they might get used this time if actually what they put out there is bad. So, imagine, they put something out there is bad, they've got the army out in the streets, they're telling everybody it's got to stay in for reasons. There'll be us lot that won't want to play the game. But what if they actually showed you credible and real footage of people dead? I mean, genuinely, right? I'm not talking about some fucking staged white hat scenario that they did over in Syria to try and make us believe that Assad was worse than he actually was. Not saying he was great, all right? But what if, say for instance, you start to hear of real people that you know that have gone down with this shit and perished? Would you take the vaccine then? Would you not? I mean, we've got to think like this, because these cunts haven't gone away. This was the biggest money maker since World War II and Vietnam and Iraq, all right? This literally changed the world stage. This changed financial situations. This shifted the balance of power financially massively to the globalists and took so much of it back off us. It's turned a generation of people into being incredibly weak. Not that some of them need a lot of help. So they've worked out that they don't actually need now to go to war and have nuclear weapons, although we will be buying those because, well, Russia and they're drumming up the Cold War thing, right? But they won't need to do anything like that. They'll actually just release something occasionally, every 5 or 10 years, and slowly reduce the population. So the problem we have is that the people who breed heavily, right, you could lose some numbers and they'll still survive. But since, I don't know, the 70s, white people have decided not to have huge families, certainly over in England and, I don't know, parts of Europe and stuff. It seems to me, I mean, when you looked at Ireland, they were having, because of obviously abortion rights and stuff like that, they were having bigger families, but we're having much more families. Now, if they kept releasing, right, pathogens every so often, and they'll never say, oh yeah, it was us, because they just don't do that, right? You know, through the breeding thing and through natural losses and losses through this disease, there is a possibility at some point or another that the only skin tone you'll see will have colour in it. And I'm talking Mediterranean upwards, all right? It's a possibility. Is that what they want to do? Well, one thing's for fucking sure. They certainly want to thin out the numbers, and you'd think to yourself that they want to thin out numbers of people who are, say, for instance, not very bright, people who are more feral. But not really, because these people are easier to control, or you haven't really got to appease these fucking animals. We're the problem, because we're still aware of what our rights should be, what we should have, and how we want to live. And while we still got democracy, I laugh, right? We're the problem. So maybe this is all to do with getting rid of us and also thinning down the population. What do you think? Anyway, I've gone on long enough, and we're off-road now, so I can actually touch my phone. So I'll see you in a bit.